Chapter 21. Lights made a huge difference. When he and Carb first entered the medical bay, the area had seemed like a cavernous mouth yawning open to swallow them whole. Now, it was a boring, albeit morbid, standard ship's med bay. While they found the Autodoc on the left-hand side, they hadn't bothered searching the other side except to ensure it was clear of pine cones and anything hostile. All they'd seen were a few bodies floating at the back of the room and retractable tables. That and a nest of light trees above them. But now that there was light, it was a completely different situation. He and Carb crept around the credenza, their rifles ready to snap flechette rounds at anything that moved. Dried blood coated the deck plating in surreal streaks, as though someone had dragged a bleeding body across the front entrance and to the other room. Dickerson said nothing, and neither did Carb. They both knew what to do. When they reached the credenza corner, Dickerson took point while Carb got an angle on the open door at the end of the hall. The doorway was a meager meter and a half wide, just enough room to fit a gurney or stretcher, but even through the relatively small space, Dickerson could see the devastation beyond. On approach, Dickerson said into his mic.
Copy.
Carb said. He crouch walked as fast as the mag boots would let him. The right side of the room came into view slowly. On low right angle,
High left angle.
she said. Carb would be a meter or two behind him, standing tall and covering anything that might approach him from the left side. Large room. Looks very different when lit up, he said.
Copy that.
Carb said.
See all that shit floating?
The stuff we didn't notice when the lights were off? Yeah, he said, stifling his gorge. I see it. The bodies weren't the only things floating in the room. Someone had savaged at least one of the corpses, dragging their offal out of the body and leaving it to drift around the room. Fortunately, the freezing temperature had turned the guts into a solid mass. Unfortunately for them, the room was heating up. He just hoped that shit wouldn't thaw before they got out of here. When he reached the doorway itself, he spoke into his mic. Move up. Although atmosphere was filling the medical bay, his suit kept him from hearing Carb's movements, much less the sound of his own mag boots. He thought about turning on the suit's environmental audio hookups, but decided against it. He didn't want to be distracted by the sound of those bodies bumping off the walls. He scanned the room for pine cones. As when they searched it before, he didn't see any. Clear right.
Clear left.
Entering the room, Dickerson said. He stood from the floor and walked in, pointing his rifle left and then right. Clear, he called. The adrenaline dumped through his bloodstream had left him ragged and his nerves sizzling. When the crash finally came, it was going to be a bad one. He turned to look at the wall next to the door and froze. Jesus, he breathed. Carb entered the room.
What?
He pointed to the wall and she followed his gaze.
What in the fuck happened here?
Scrawled on the wall in thick, messy lines, someone had written, Humankind's End. The artist had used a palette of blood for color and a severed hand for a brush.
Fire team, status?
Kelly asked over the squad channel. Dickerson said nothing. He didn't know what to say. Elliot certainly didn't need to hear about this shit.
Boss, we're clear in here.
Carb said.
Multiple casualties, also some messages.
Messages. Yeah, she was right about that. The artist hadn't merely scrawled the two words. On the adjacent wall, behind 3 floating corpses, lines and lines of bloody words covered the steel. Dried and frozen, they would stay there for eternity.
Messages?
Kelly asked.
Send me a feed. Done, boss.
Carb said. Dickerson ignored the wall of mad writing and symbols and stared at the metal table in the back corner. Shit, he said. Carb?
What?
He couldn't see her turn around, but he heard her breath catch.
Is that what I think it is?
The autopsy table didn't have a body, exactly. Instead, the gleaming steel surface held a chest. The head, arms, and legs were missing. A long hook and loop fastener strapped the remains to the table. Next to it, covered in blood, was a pine cone, its bulbous body secured the same way. Only it wasn't a pine cone anymore. The creature's exterior had been cracked open, probably with a surgical vibroblade, and peeled back. Small chips of what looked like metal floated in the air above the table. The pinecone's bottom looked like something he'd seen before but couldn't place. It reminded him again of the Dallas Aquarium. The tanks that held the few surviving crustacean and cephalopod species kept bouncing in his thoughts. The claw, though, was downright terrifying. The pinecone thing's claw had 3 toes. Each looked razor sharp and made of some kind of alloy. Now that he could look at one of the things in the light, he was convinced it was something biological, despite its metal-like surface and the fact it could survive a vacuum and the absolute zero temperature of deep space. How the hell does it move? He asked aloud.
Who cares?
Carb said.
As long as we know how to kill them, that's all that matters.
Did they drag that thing out of that chest?
Don't know.
Carb said. He turned to her. It was maddening not being able to see the expression on her face. I feel like we should get out of here, Dickerson said. Screw the mission. She nodded.
Copy that.
She said.
I hope we vaporize this ship with nukes.
He stepped away from the table, unable to look anymore. The sight of that thing, its outer shell peeled back revealing its inner workings, was making him ill, more so than even the hollowed-out chest sitting next to it. Dickerson examined the desk in the corner and found a hollow terminal. The projectors were smashed. There was no way he was going to be able to connect to it. Corporal?
Go.
She said. The only terminal in here has been destroyed. I don't see any other comms devices. What do you want us to do?
Secure that room if you can. I want those doors closed.
Kelly said.
I saw the feed, and I want that room quarantined.
Corporal, Dickerson said. Carb, let's get the door down. I don't ever want to come back in here. Chapter 22. Gunny wasn't happy. He was pleased, for the most part, but not happy. The squad hadn't managed to fuck things up too badly, and the lines were mostly down and secure. Wint had actually acted like a lance corporal for once, and helped the young nom-rates with both the lines and the harness fittings. Gunny wasn't sure he could have done a better job himself. What he wasn't happy about was the last line. Talby warned them there was more of that acid shit back there. That meant he'd have to fly slow and careful and keep his squad on their toes. His nom-rates were tired. Hell, he was tired. Fatigue had an undeniably deleterious effect on performance and diligence. After they placed the thrusters and Talby had towed them in, they'd had a total of 30 minutes outside their suits. Wint had made sure the rest of the squad reloaded their air, their liquids, consumed some protein, and rechecked their suits. Gunny had supervised with his usual dour expression, but he'd been shocked at how easily Wint had transformed himself from a jackass into the experienced Marine he actually was. There was hope, after all. A 30-minute respite from hours of a suit's stifling silence, the beat of your own heart pulsing in your ears, and the disorientation of weightlessness wasn't much of a break. Placing the last line wasn't even the end of this phase of their task either. They still had to wait for the nannies to finish coalescing, make sure they knew what to do, and then lock S&R Black into the harness. Each of those steps involved troubleshooting, walking carefully, and doing your best not to fall through fragmented decking. 2 privates, 1 PFC, 1 disgraced lance corporal, and 1 pissed-off and tired gunnery sergeant floated atop the most famous and infamous ship in human history. What could possibly go wrong? Finish that line yet? Gunny called out. Wint's voice came back immediately, although Gunny had said it over the squad channel.
Gunny. Just placed it. Should be getting the signal any second.
Sure enough, his HUD lit with a new status message from the harness. Gunny grunted. Good job, Marines. Get your asses back here on the skiff. This is going to be a long haul.
Gunny.
Wint said. He and his fire team mate, Private Like, started their long mag walk back to the spindle. Gunny watched their lights dance in the distance.
Gunny?
PFC Copenhaver asked over the private comms. Gunny raised an eyebrow. Talking to him over private? That was something new. Go, he said. She stood by the spindle, one hand mag-locked to its side, her head pointed at the status panels.
Nannies are coalescing again. Looks like the hive has increased by another 15%.
Copy, he said.
But...
He rolled his eyes. What is it, PFC?
Sorry, Gunny. This last line, we're going to have to drag it carefully. If we shred it, It looks like the nannies won't be able to do their jobs properly.
Bullshit, he said. He fought the sinking feeling in his stomach. We should have enough redundancy to more than make up for any loss,
I don't think so, Gunny.
she said.
If we were towing something half of Mira's mass, I'd agree. But I don't think we have enough lines for this monster.
Cursing, he connected to Black. You monitoring the comms, Black?
Of course,
The AI replied.
PFC Copenhagen is correct, Gunnery Sergeant.
He blew a hiss through his teeth. And why didn't you tell us this before?
The fact is,
The AI said.
we do have enough redundancy to manage a slow burn tow. We do not, however, have enough line to recover from evasive maneuvers.
Growling inside his helmet, he connected to Dunn. Sir?
Copy, Gunny.
Black just informed us we will have to be very careful with this tow, sir. Dunn paused.
Oakes, Noble, and I came to the same conclusion, Gunny. Not much we can do about it. What's your status?
Sir, my Marines are walking back to the skiff. I'm going to leave Copenhagen and Murdoch here to watch the spindle and take Winton Like for the last line. Over.
ETA?
The captain asked. They should be back here in 2 minutes. Unless I find some serious obstacles in our way, we should be able to get to the last mount point pretty quickly, sir.
Good.
Dunn said. He paused for a moment. When he spoke again, he sounded grim.
Gunny, take your time. You know why.
Aye, sir. I do. Car right out. You know why. Yeah, he did. The captain didn't want to say it, and Gunny didn't want to hear it. Take your time. Because regardless of how soon the KBO would enter the area and smash both S&R Black and Mira to pieces, Dunn didn't want another Marine to die on the ghost ship's hull. Gunny didn't want that either. The lights from Went and Like suits were closer now. When he told Dunn 2 minutes, he was stretching the estimate. The 2 Marines would be back on the skiff in 30 seconds. Copenhagen, he said over the squad comms. You and Murdoch are going to babysit the spindle. You will make damn sure you scream out if something goes wrong. Understood? Both Copenhagen and Murdoch answered with affirmatives. Gunny looked up at Went as he approached. About time you two got back here, he said.
Ah, Gunny.
Went said.
Like is slow as shit. Shut up, Went.
Like said. Leave your marital spat for back on Black. Went, grab the last line. Like, take the gun and be ready to help Went with any problems. This is going to be a long hike. No fuck-ups. Understood?
Ah, Gunny.
Went said. After a few seconds, Like replied as well. Through his rear suit cam, he watched Went step around the skiff to the spindle. He maglocked a glove on the line and began pulling it to the skiff's rear. A moment later, Went stood.
All good, Gunny.
Better be, he said, or I'll have you scrubbing the ship on our way back to Neptune. Now get in. Went said nothing, climbed into the skiff near the line attachment, and faced the rear.
I'm ready, Gunny.
Gunny to Talby, over.
Dalby here. I'm on my way back with a little surprise.
Gunny frowned. He wished the captain hadn't told the lieutenant he could go treasure hunting. If anything went wrong, Talby needed to be on the spot in a heartbeat, like he was with Nero. Not that that had helped much. The private had stepped in the glistening liquid on the hull and lost one of his legs to what appeared to be some kind of acid. The boy's suit had finally come apart when they tried to use the line gun to retrieve him. He hadn't survived the trip back to S&R Black, although Talby had tried to save him. Don't forget, he told himself. You tried to save him too. Gunny touched the throttle. Compressed nitrogen puffed from the rear jets and the skiff crawled forward, its bottom a mere meter from Mira's hull. He hadn't wanted to leave Copenhagen and Murdoch back at the spindle. He wanted them aboard the skiff and helping him spot hazards along the way. But someone needed to stay behind in case the spindle stopped responding to block commands or something else happened to one of the placed lines. He sure as shit wasn't going to leave a lone Marine back there, especially a PFC or a private. Besides, Copenhagen was capable. Green, but capable. She'd manage things, even if Murdoch was a near hopeless cause. Gunny grunted. When he got their asses back to Neptune, everyone, and that meant everyone in the goddamn company except for the officers, was going to go through a little mag boot camp. He'd find a way to make these Marines into something useful. Somehow. Chapter 23. The medical bay was warm enough. 5 degrees Celsius would have to do because she was afraid to wait any longer. Elliot's blood pressure was dangerously low, and he continued flitting in and out of consciousness. Shock was killing him. After calling in, it took Carbonaro and Dickerson less than 2 minutes to get back to the examination and medical room. Callie felt shaky after what she'd seen through their feeds. She didn't want to read the words they'd seen on the wall, but she knew that, eventually, she would. If they ever managed to connect with Black again, she was going to make sure everything in that room was fed directly to the AI. Someone on Trident Station needed to figure out what had happened here. When the 2 Marines walked in the doorway, the shakes in her hands departed at once. Being here, being alone, even with Elliot next to her, was terrifying. Her imagination kept running a horror hollow through her mind, complete with schools of pine cones and dismembered bodies. She wasn't sure she'd ever sleep again. Callie opened the Autodoc. "Carb, help me get him out of the suit. Dickerson, you're the guard,"
Aye, Corporal.
he said. Carb stepped to Elliot's floating body. The 2 women pulled until his feet were flat on the floor. While Callie held him still, she connected to Elliot's block and sent an override command. The suit vibrated as it depressurized. The visor and helmet opened, revealing Elliot's pale skin and bluish lips. The cold air hit him, and he began to shiver. "Hurry," Kelly said. Depressurized, the suit lost its rigidity. Carb peeled the suit down to the waist and freed his uninjured arm. She reached into her belt and removed a vibroblade, thumbed the handle, and the sharpened Atmos steel wavered like heat haze. Carb delicately and carefully cut the suit to free the partially dismembered arm. As soon as she reached the suit clamp that had functioned as a tourniquet, fresh beads of blood bubbled from the wound and floated to the ceiling.
"This is going to hurt, Elliot,"
Carb said.
"Ready?"
He nodded.
"On 3.
She said, and ripped the cap off the dismembered arm. Elliot's mouth opened in a scream, but no one heard it through their suits. More blood bubbled out from the wound. Kelly placed the silently shrieking Elliot into the Autodoc and closed the transparent top. Straps slid out and locked him to the dock's metal slab. A warm blue light shot across his body as the device scanned him for injury. It immediately found the amputation point, and a steel spider rolled out of the wall. One leg held a syringe that pulled blood from his body, while another waited with a different syringe. As soon as a few milliliters appeared in the tube, the machine paused for an eye blink before the other syringe dropped and pumped fresh blood into his system. Another leg unfolded and swung over to the maimed limb. A bright blue line appeared before a pair of metal claws, and then it raced over the stump. Callie was glad she couldn't hear Elliot's screams, but they lasted only a second or two before his body completely relaxed. A line of curly smoke rose from the cauterized limb. Swarms of bio-nannies appeared through the pores in his arms and legs, racing to a spot a few centimeters from Elliot's left shoulder. They quickly disappeared. New swarms trickled and then swept over his body like a plague before burying themselves in the same fashion the others had departed. A holo display fired to life above the Autodoc. Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, blood type, blood oxygen level, bio-nanny statuses. Her lips twitched into a brief smile. The dock was replenishing everything. Now that the stump had been treated properly, drugs injected, and essential fluids replaced, Elliot was going to make it, at least until they got him off this hulk. She imagined the blood was synthetic and the new bio-nannies would use it until Elliot's organs caught up and could handle the strain on their own. The one thing he needed that he couldn't get was rest. As soon as they had him back in his suit, they could... Oh shit, the suit. She looked down at the tattered remains. When Carb had cut off the sleeve, she'd effectively rendered the suit useless. They'd have to find him a new one. "Carb, Dickerson," she said over private comms. "We have a problem. Elliot won't have a suit." There was a long pause.
"Shit,"
Carb said.
"There's no airlock here. We'd have to depressurize the medical bay to go find one." "Damn it,"
Dickerson said.
"What about the Autodoc? Is it pressure safe?"
Kelly consulted the Autodoc's diagnostics. As she remembered, it had a pressure fault. She selected the report and scanned it. Okay, the Autodoc will have pressure and atmosphere for a short time. However, the CO2 filters are leaking,
Meaning what?
Dickerson asked. Meaning it's going to vent carbon dioxide, and the back pressure from a vacuum will ultimately compromise them completely. Once that happens, she said, the Autodoc will lose pressure fast. Carb put a hand on the wall and leaned.
So what do we do?
Kelly turned from the Autodoc to face her Marines. It's getting warm in here, downright toasty compared to what it's like outside. And while I'd like nothing more than to get out of this suit for a few minutes, I don't think we can risk it,
Copy that.
Dickerson said.
We've all got damage. If I pull this thing off, it might not be pressure safe again.
Exactly, Kelly said. So we either stay here and hope that Talby and Gunny find us within the next 20 hours or so, or we break the seal, find Elliot a suit, make it to the bow, and find a way to make contact with Black. The three Marines fell silent. Kelly was fairly sure what both Carb and Dickerson would vote for, but this wasn't a democracy. She was in charge, regardless of their former ranks and their experience. But asking the question, that was how to lead. Get some idea of what the troops were thinking. Make sure they know you're listening to them, and then make the best decision based on the arguments and logic. She'd hear them out, but she already knew what she wanted to do.
Well, shit.
Dickerson said.
I don't want to leave this room.
He said, pointing to the blood-streaked wall.
The art is top-notch. The walls are thick, and those fucking pinecone things aren't in here. Copy that.
Carb said.
But,
he continued,
I think staying here is going to be a bad idea in the long run.
Why? Kelly asked.
Because,
he said,
if the seals fail, Elliot dies. If something comes through the vents, Elliot dies. If we stay here too long and no one comes for us, Elliot dies. That's the way I see it.
Carb groaned.
Hate to say it, boss, but Meathead is right.
Kelly nodded. Was pretty sure the two of you were going to say that. Carb, what's the nanny status on your jack? She paused for a moment before replying.
They're ready. I imagine we've got at least 7 or 8 more tries with them before they run out of power. I have a jack too,
Dickerson said. As do I, Kelly said. So here's what I want to do. We're going to do one more search around the medical bay looking for damaged panels. Use your seal patches and pressure lock the other room. When we lose pressure in here, I don't want something to know about it if it somehow finds a way in there.
Aye, Corporal,
Dickerson said. I'll go through the schematics and find a likely place for suits.
You mean,
Carb said,
outside of the cargo bay and shuttle bay?
Shit. Yeah, those two are out. We go forward and up until we can't, Kelly said. I want to be as far away from those areas as possible.
Sounds good. Let's do it, Carb,
Dickerson said. The two Marines headed out of the room. Kelly watched them go and then slowly turned back to the Autodoc. You just have to hold the seal for a little while, she said to it. Don't fuck me on this. While Dickerson and Carb sealed the other room's door with pressure patches, she brought up the schematics. They were on the third lowest level of Mira's foredecks. They had nearly 250 meters of space on each deck, with 6 more decks above them. 6 more decks of darkness, ZG, absolute zero temperatures, and vacuum. If they were going to do this, she needed to locate the most likely spot to find a spare suit. That part was relatively easy. Each deck had an emergency station in case of pressure loss. From the jumpsuit-clad corpses they'd found thus far, it was obvious Mira's crew hadn't worn pressure suits while on duty, unless their jobs required it. The cargo bay was probably filled with pressure suits. If they'd bothered scouting the entire shuttle bay, they would probably have found spares there as well. That's what you get for not thinking, she said aloud. She'd been panicked to find an Autodoc, panicked because of what Black had told her, and too eager to find a safe place. And for that, Elliot might end up dying anyway. She shook away the thoughts. They weren't helpful to figuring this out. What was helpful were the clearly marked emergency stations. Since the ship had lost pressure, the stations had probably activated to keep nearby personnel alive while they suited up. And that brought up another problem. If Mira's personnel had survived the loss of atmosphere long enough, how many of them had put on the EVA suits to survive? How many unused suits were there, and on what decks? One thing at a time, she told herself. Since leaving the cargo bay, the two decks they barely searched had been devoid of the pine cones, and the damage appeared relatively minimal, apart from the savaged corpses and the writing in blood. At least they wouldn't have to worry about the scribe of those messages. 43 years was far too long for someone to survive in this, unless they somehow managed to power a stasis system for the duration. Given the power readings Black had reported, she very much doubted that was a possibility. The emergency station on this deck was 50 meters down the corridor from the medical bay. The next was another 50 meters away. She overlaid the deck maps and smiled. Each deck had an emergency station at roughly the same intervals and positions. This wasn't going to be as difficult as she feared. Provided they weren't all used, she said to herself. That line of thinking wasn't constructive. She'd send Dickerson and Carb to scout. They'd find something. She believed in them. If there was a spare suit on Mira, they'd find it.